Hello, welcome back to some more fun with managerial accounting. Today we're going to review cost volume profit analysis concepts using exercise 310, which has been replicated here. Okay, so here is a recent financial statement for this company called MathTot. And the first thing they want us to do is to find MathTot's contribution margin ratio and its variable cost ratio. Okay, so we want to remember, and we're going to write down the formulas because the more we write them, the better we'll remember them. Our formula for contribution margin ratio, we have two choices. We could either take our total contribution margin, which is given to us here, and divide it by our total sales. Okay, so our total contribution margin is $390,000. Our total sales are $600,000, and if we divide them, we get 65%. Okay, an alternative way of finding contribution margin ratio is to use unit amounts. So we can take our contribution margin per unit and divide it by our selling price per unit. We should get the same number. So our contribution margin per unit is given to us. It's $32.50. Selling price per unit is $50. And again, we're going to divide and get 65%. Okay, so the second thing they want us to do is the variable cost ratio, which is very similar. That's the ratio of variable expenses to our sales. So let's do the same thing again. We can take our total variable costs and we can divide them by total sales. So our total variable costs here are $210, and again our sales are $600,000. We're going to divide those and get 35%. Okay, remember, contribution margin ratio plus variable cost ratio add to 100%. All right, so we might add a third alternative here, which would simply be take 100%, subtract your contribution margin ratio, and you get your variable expense ratio. Okay, but let's do it this way again. Take our variable cost per unit and divide by selling price per unit. Variable cost per unit is $17.50. Selling price per unit $50. And again, we're going to get 35%. Okay, so that's the answer to part A. Part B wants to know what is MathTot's margin of safety. Recall, margin of safety is the difference between our current sales and our break-even sales. That tells us how much our sales can drop before we'll start to incur losses. So the two pieces of information we need are our current sales and our break-even sales. Okay, the current sales are easy. Those are given here. That's $600,000. All right, so now we need to find out how much our break-even sales are. All right, so hopefully you remember the break-even sales formula. Break-even in sales dollars is equal to fixed costs divided by our contribution margin percentage. All right, so we're going to set this equal to our fixed costs, $292.5, divided by our contribution margin percentage. Okay, so that tells us that our break-even sales are $450,000. We're going to put those up here. And our margin of safety is the difference between the $600,000 and the $450,000, or $150,000. That's our answer to part B. Now let's take a look at part C. In part C, we start to look at what we call what-if analysis. We look to see, well, what will happen to our income and our financials if there are certain changes made. All right, so the trick here is to figure out which information we need to answer the question. The question is, if MathTot's sales were to increase by $100,000 with no change in fixed expenses, by how much would operating income increase? Okay, the simplest way to do this, remember, if our sales go up, what else happens? Our variable costs go up and our contribution margin goes up. So our fixed costs are not going to change at all. So what we're going to do is take our increase in sales and multiply it by our contribution margin percentage, and that will give us our increase in operating income. Okay, so our increase in sales is 100,000. Contribution margin 65%. So that means if we increase our sales by 100,000, our operating income will increase by $65,000. Notice nothing else changed in that example. Okay. All right, so in the last case, there were all kinds of things changing, and in this case, you have to be very, very careful to not make any wrong assumptions. So they say MathTOTS managers have determined that variable costs per unit will increase by 16% beginning next month. All right, let's set up our income statement. Okay, let's copy this and put it down here. We're going to set up our income statement under the new circumstances. All right, so our variable cost per unit will increase by 16%. So let's make this equal to our old variable expenses times 116%. So what that's doing is adding 16% to our old cost. So the old cost plus 16%. Okay? All right, what else do we know? To offset this increase in costs, they're considering a 10% increase in the sales price. Okay, so our new sales price will be equal to our old sales price times 110%. Okay, so again, old selling price plus 10%. All right, so that means our new contribution margin is equal to the 55 minus the 2030, or 3470. Okay, finally, market research indicates that the price increase will result in a 2% decrease in the number of learning systems MathTOT sells. All right, so that means we need to figure out how many units we're going to sell in the new situation. So we have a 2% decrease in volume. All right, so the number of units we're currently selling is what we need to figure out. Okay, how many units are we currently selling? We're going to take our sales and we're going to divide them by the selling price per unit, and that will give us the units we are currently selling. Okay, so our current sales are 600,000. Our selling price per unit is $50, and we're going to divide 600,000 by $50, and we find out that we are currently selling 12,000 units. All right, so now we know that our new sales volume is going to be 98% of the old sales volume because it's going down 2%. Okay, so our new volume, or new number of sales units, will be equal to the old number of sales times 0.98. Alternatively, you could take 2% and you could subtract it. This is just a shortcut. Okay? All right, so now we're ready to put together the new income statement. Our sales are going to be equal to the new volume times the new selling price. Variable expenses, new volume times the new variable cost. Our contribution margin, we'll take our sales minus our variable costs and get our contribution margin. The only thing that's not changed here is our fixed expenses, so let's go back and make it equal to the old fixed expenses. So our operating income is equal to contribution margin minus our fixed expenses. So our new operating income is $115,572. Now, they don't ask us whether or not the decision is a good idea, but it seems to be a good idea if our only criteria is the increase in operating income. Okay? All right, so that finishes our exercise. I hope you find this video useful. in your managerial accounting studies.